Did you know that Oxford University's most brilliant scholar, a young man so talented that Queen Elizabeth herself noticed him, destined for greatness in the Anglican Church, threw away fame, safety, and future to become a hunted Catholic priest preaching in secret attics across Protestant England? What kind of courage returns to a country where being a Catholic priest is high treason, punishable by being hanged, drawn, and quartered, knowing capture means torture and execution, yet spending 13 months celebrating Mass in hiding before being betrayed? Why does a man of such learning and eloquence, who could debate theology with anyone, who wrote the defiant Campion's Brag, challenging Protestant England, go to his brutal execution saying only, "I am a Catholic," refusing to argue, accepting death with meekness? This is the story of Saint Edmund Campion, the Oxford genius who became a Jesuit martyr, who returned to England knowing he would die, who preached truth in whispers in hidden rooms, who was tortured on the rack and executed at Tyburn, proving that some truths are worth dying for, that intellect finds its fulfillment in faith, and that the greatest scholars sometimes become the greatest martyrs. The halls of St. John's College, Oxford, echoed with his name, Edmund Campion, brilliant, eloquent, destined for greatness. Born in London in 1540 to a bookseller's family, young Edmund showed such promise that he was sent to Oxford at 15. Within years, he became the university's rising star. His mind was sharp as winter steel. He mastered Latin, Greek, rhetoric, and philosophy with ease that astounded his professors. When he spoke in debates, audiences fell silent, captivated by the precision of his arguments and the music of his words. Fellow students watched in awe. Professors predicted he would reshape English theology. In 1566, Queen Elizabeth I herself visited Oxford. She walked through the colleges, observing England's finest minds. When she heard Edmund Campion speak, she stopped. His words were perfect, his bearing was dignified, his intelligence is undeniable. The Queen smiled. She remembered his name. Word spread quickly. The Queen had noticed Edmund Campion. His future was assured. He became a junior fellow at St. John's College, then a deacon in the Church of England. Everything pointed upward. Archbishop, perhaps, royal chaplain. A voice that would shape the English Church for decades. The path was clear, golden, inevitable. But something stirred beneath the surface, a quiet unease that wouldn't let him rest. Edmund began reading the Church Fathers, Augustine, Jerome, Chrysostom. The more he read, the more questions arose. The Catholic Church had existed for 15 centuries before Henry VIII's break with Rome. How could truth change so suddenly? How could the faith of England's ancient saints be wrong and this new religion right? Late at night, by candlelight, he compared Anglican teaching with Catholic tradition, the Eucharist, the priesthood, the authority of the Church. His brilliant mind couldn't ignore the contradictions. His conscience began to ache. Friends noticed the change. His sermons grew cautious. His joy dimmed. In the dining hall, he sat quietly, while others debated theology. When pressed about Catholic doctrines, he gave careful, measured answers. Too careful, people whispered. The golden boy was beginning to doubt. And in Elizabethan England, doubt about the state religion was dangerous. The pressure mounted daily. Take the oath of supremacy. Declare Elizabeth head of the Church. Renounce papal authority. It was required for advancement, expected of every ambitious young scholar. But Edmund hesitated. His conscience wouldn't let him sign. In 1569, he made a desperate choice. He fled England. The journey was perilous. Catholic sympathizers could be arrested for treason. Ships were searched. Ports were watched. But Edmund slipped away, leaving behind his fellowship, his future, everything he'd worked for. He was 29 years old. He went to Ireland first, seeking refuge with Catholic families still resisting English religious laws. There, in secret rooms and hidden chapels, he saw what faith under persecution looked like. Priests celebrating Mass in whispers, families risking everything to remain Catholic, simple people with courage greater than Oxford scholars. It shook him. These people had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Yet they held fast. Why? Because they believed, truly believed. In 1571, Edmund crossed to the continent. In Douai, France, he was received into the Catholic Church. The moment he'd been resisting, fearing, longing for. When the priest said the words of absolution, Edmund wept. The weight lifted. The truth he'd been running from became the truth that set him free. But conversion wasn't enough. His brilliant mind needed direction. His restless heart needed purpose. In 1573, he traveled to Rome and presented himself to the Jesuits. The Society of Jesus, Ignatius Loyola's order, soldiers of Christ, formed in the fires of the Counter-Reformation. They sent their priests to the hardest missions. They asked for total surrender. They made no promises of comfort or safety. Edmund knelt before the superior. "I wish to serve God wherever he sends me. I wish to give everything." They accepted him. For 5 years, he studied, prayed, and prepared. In Brno, in Prague, surrounded by other young Jesuits, he discovered what his life had been preparing him for. Not academic glory, not royal favor, but martyrdom. He felt it in his bones. God was asking him to go back, to return to England, to die. In 1578, he was ordained a Catholic priest. His hands, once destined to write theological treatises for the Anglican Church, were now consecrated to offer the Mass. The transformation was complete. And then, in 1580, the call came. The Jesuit superior asked for volunteers for the English mission. It was suicide. Everyone knew it. English law declared Catholic priests traitors. The penalty was death. Horrific death. Hanged, drawn, and quartered. Edmund didn't hesitate. "I will go." They landed in England in June 1580. Edmund Campion and Robert Persons, 2 Jesuit priests returning to their homeland as hunted men. They disguised themselves as jewel merchants, traveling under false names, avoiding main roads. England had changed, or perhaps Edmund was seeing it clearly for the first time. Churches stripped of their beauty, statues smashed, altars bare. Catholic families living in fear, unable to practice their faith openly. Recusants, they were called, those who refused to attend Anglican services. They paid heavy fines, they lost property. Some were imprisoned. But they were waiting. When word spread quietly that Jesuit priests had arrived, doors opened in the night. Edmund was led through back alleys into hidden rooms, attics, cellars. Secret chapels built into manor houses where Catholic families risked everything to hear Mass. And there, in the flickering candlelight, Edmund celebrated the liturgy he'd been ordained for. He lifted the host, spoke the words of consecration, gave communion to people starving for the sacraments. Old women wept, strong men knelt with tears streaming. Children who'd never seen a priest watched in wonder. He preached in whispers, but his words burned with conviction. He explained the faith, answered questions, heard confessions, and baptized children. He was Oxford's brilliant scholar, but here he was simply a priest, doing what priests do, bringing Christ to the people. But Edmund couldn't stay silent. His conscience demanded he speak publicly. In July 1580, he wrote a letter that would become famous, or infamous, Campion's Brag. It was bold, audacious, defiant. He challenged the Protestant establishment to a public debate. He declared his mission clearly. "I am determined to preach the gospel, to minister the sacraments, to instruct the simple, to reform sinners, to confute errors, in brief, to cry alarm spiritual against foul vice and proud ignorance." He addressed the Queen's Council directly. Many innocent hands are lifted up to heaven for you daily by those English students whose posterity shall never die, which beyond seas, gathering virtue and sufficient knowledge for the purpose, are determined never to give you over, but either to win you heaven or to die upon your pikes. The letter was copied and distributed. It spread across England. The government was furious. The hunt intensified. Edmund Campion became the most wanted man in England. For 13 months, he moved constantly, never sleeping in the same house twice, celebrating Mass before dawn, then disappearing, traveling by night, changing disguises, always one step ahead of the priest hunters. He was exhausted, hunted, living on borrowed time, but he was also alive in a way he'd never been at Oxford. This was what his brilliant mind was for. Not academic fame, truth. Truth worth dying for. They called them priest hunters, men paid by the government to track down Catholic clergy. They searched manor houses, interrogated servants, towed and returned suspects. The penalty for harboring a priest was death. The penalty for being a priest was worse. Edmund knew they were closing in. Every knock at the door could be betrayal. Every stranger could be a spy. Catholic families risked everything to shelter him, but the danger grew daily. He continued preaching, moving from house to house in Berkshire, Oxfordshire, and Lancashire, celebrating Mass in hidden chapels. The priest holes, tiny concealed spaces built into walls where priests could hide during raids. Sometimes he spent hours in these dark, cramped spaces, barely breathing, listening to soldiers searching the house. His body weakened, constant travel, little sleep, persistent fear. His feet ached, his back hurt. But when he stood at the altar, strength returned. This was why he'd come. These moments, these people, these masses celebrated in secret, in defiance of a government that wanted to stamp out the Catholic faith forever. One night in Berkshire, a messenger arrived with terrible news. Several priests had been captured, tortured, executed. The methods were described in detail. Hanged until nearly dead, cut down while still conscious, disemboweled, and body parts displayed on pikes. This is what awaited Edmund. He didn't flinch. It is the greatest honor God could give us, to die for Christ as Christ died for us. But on the 17th of July, 1581, the inevitable happened. He was staying at Lyford Grange, a manor house in Berkshire. Someone betrayed him, perhaps a servant, perhaps a visitor. The priest hunters came at dawn. They searched the house methodically, room by room, opening closets, tapping walls. The Catholics inside prayed silently. Edmund was hidden in a priest hole, a space so small he could barely move. He heard boots on the floor above, voices, commands, furniture being overturned. The searchers found nothing. They were about to leave. Edmund breathed carefully in the darkness, perhaps. But they returned. A second search, more thorough. They discovered the hidden door, pulled back the panel. Torchlight flooded the tiny space. Edmund Campion, you are under arrest for high treason. He emerged, stiff from hours of hiding, blinking in the light. His captors stared. Oxford's golden boy, the Queen's favorite, now a hunted priest, dirty and exhausted. They bound his hands, led him outside. The journey to London began. And Edmund Campion, who'd spent 13 months bringing the sacraments to England's secret Catholics, now began his journey to Tyburn. The Tower of London, cold stone, iron bars, the smell of damp and decay. Edmund was thrown into a cell so small he couldn't stand upright. They called it Little Ease, a space designed to break men without breaking their bodies. He couldn't sit, couldn't lie down fully, only crouch, twisted, muscles screaming. But the real torture came later. They took him to the rack, a device of wood and rope and turning wheels. They stretched him on it. Limbs pulled in opposite directions. A man operated the wheel, turning slowly. Joints separated. Ligaments tore. The pain was beyond description. "Renounce your Catholic faith." "Edmund," voice hoarse, "I cannot." Another turn of the wheel. His shoulders dislocated. He screamed, "Acknowledge the Queen as head of the Church. I acknowledge her as Queen. But Christ is head of his Church." They tortured him 3 times on the rack, so severely that he couldn't walk afterward, couldn't use his hands, his brilliant mind trapped in a broken body. They carried him to his cell, left him in agony, waiting. The government tried a different tactic: debates, public theological disputations with Protestant ministers. If they couldn't break his body, perhaps they could break his arguments. Show England that even brilliant Edmund Campion couldn't defend Catholic doctrine. They were wrong. Injured, exhausted, unable to hold a pen, Edmund still debated with clarity and power. He answered every objection, cited scripture and the church fathers from memory. His opponents grew frustrated. Even after torture, his mind was sharper than theirs. The government realized they couldn't defeat him intellectually. They would have to kill him legally. The trial was predetermined. November 1581. The charge: high treason. Not heresy, that would require theological debate. Treason. They accused him of plotting to overthrow the Queen. The evidence was fabricated. Everyone knew it. Even the prosecutors knew it. Edmund stood before his judges, still unable to use his hands from the torture. He looked at the men who would condemn him. Many he'd known at Oxford. Some had been his students. His voice was steady. "In condemning us, you condemn all your own ancestors, all the ancient priests, bishops, and kings, all that was once the glory of England." Guilty. The verdict was announced. The sentence: death. The method: hanged, drawn, and quartered. Edmund bowed his head, not in despair, in acceptance. "Te Deum laudamus," he began to sing. "We praise you, O God," the ancient hymn of thanksgiving. His fellow prisoners joined. Their voices rose in that chamber of death, praising God for the privilege of martyrdom. The 1st of December, 1581. The day appointed. Edmund Campion had 1 month to live. The morning came cold and gray. The 1st of December, 1581. Tyburn, on the outskirts of London. The permanent gallows stood waiting. 3 crossbeams. The Tyburn tree, where traitors died. They led Edmund through the streets on a hurdle, a wooden sledge dragged behind a horse. His battered body jolted over cobblestones. Crowds lined the route. Some jeered. Some wept. Some prayed silently, risking suspicion by their sympathy. Edmund lay on his back, staring at the gray English sky, the sky of his homeland, the land he loved so much. He'd returned to die for it, not against England, for England's soul. At Tyburn, they pulled him upright. His legs barely held him. The rope was placed around his neck. 2 other Catholic priests stood beside him, Ralph Sherwin and Alexander Briant. All 3 would die together. The executioner asked the ritual question, "Do you acknowledge your treason against the Queen?" Edmund's voice was clear, surprisingly strong for a broken body. "If to be a Catholic, to be a priest, is treason, then I am a traitor. But I have committed no treason. I am innocent." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Save yourself. Just say the words. Renounce." Edmund looked at the man. His eyes were calm, almost sad. "I cannot purchase my life at the price of my soul. I am a Catholic." "I die for the Catholic faith." The executioner offered him a chance to speak to the people. This was Edmund's moment. The brilliant orator, the master of rhetoric, Oxford's golden boy. He could give a speech that would be remembered for centuries. Instead, he simply prayed, "Spectaculum facti sumus, Deo, angelus et hominibus." We are made a spectacle to God, to angels, and to men. A quote from St. Paul. Then, quietly, "Into your hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." The cart was pulled away. Edmund dropped. The rope tightened. He swung in the cold December air, strangling, gasping, but conscious. They always kept martyrs conscious of what came next. After several minutes, while still alive, they cut him down, laid him on a table. The executioner took his knife and cut open Edmund's abdomen, reached inside, pulled out his intestines while he still breathed. Edmund's lips moved in prayer. The executioner cut out his heart, held it up to the crowd, and declared, "Behold the heart of a traitor." A woman in the crowd shouted back, "No, the heart of a saint." They quartered his body, cut it into 4 pieces. His head was placed on a pike on London Bridge, a warning to other Catholics. His body parts were displayed across the city. Edmund Campion was 41 years old. The government thought they had silenced him. They were wrong. Edmund's death spoke louder than any sermon. News of his martyrdom spread across Europe. He became a symbol. The Jesuit priest who went to his death with such grace, the brilliant scholar who valued truth more than life. In secret Catholic homes across England, his name was whispered with reverence. Children were told his story. Families prayed for his intercession. His execution, meant to terrify Catholics into submission, instead strengthened their faith. If Edmund Campion could die so bravely, they too could endure. The years passed, centuries passed, England changed, the persecution ended. Slowly, gradually, Catholics regained their rights, but Edmund's witness remained. In 1886, Pope Leo XIII beatified him. In 1970, Pope Paul VI canonized him as one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. His feast day is December 1, the anniversary of his martyrdom. On that day, Catholics remember the Oxford scholar who became a hunted priest, the man who could have had everything but chose to have Christ instead. Saint Edmund Campion's legacy endures because his story is universal. He reminds intellectuals that faith perfects reason, not destroys it. He reminds those facing pressure that truth is worth suffering for. He reminds all of us that some things cannot be compromised, no matter the cost. Today, in a world that demands we compromise our beliefs for comfort, career, or acceptance, Edmund stands as a challenge. What are you willing to die for? What truth matters more than your safety? When the culture demands you deny what you know to be true, will you have the courage to say simply, "I cannot"? His message is clear. The greatest minds can have the greatest courage. Brilliance finds its completion not in academic acclaim, but in martyrdom. Truth demands everything, and some voices speak loudest when silenced. Edmund could have lived. He could have compromised. Just a few words. Just a small denial. Just sign the oath. But he knew that the soul purchased at the price of truth is no soul at all. Oxford's golden boy became Tyburn's martyr. The Queen's favorite died on her gallows. The brilliant debater was cut down and cut open while still alive. He was hanged, disemboweled, quartered, his body parts displayed like meat. He was 41. But 389 years later, he was declared a saint. And today, when someone stands for truth at the cost of everything, we remember Edmund Campion, the priest who died preaching truth. The Jesuit who returned to England, knowing he would die. The martyr whose witness still echoes. Saint Edmund Campion, pray for us. Give us minds that seek truth, hearts that hold fast, courage that doesn't compromise. And if God calls us to martyrdom, red or white, let us go singing Te Deum as you did, praising God for the privilege of suffering for Christ. For in the end, truth is worth everything, even life itself.